Good morning, everyone. We are beginning today with the Vishnu Mahapurana, Skandha 4, Chapter 5. Continuing with the genealogies of the kings, and continuing with the various branches of the line of, well, not the line, but other branches of the progeny of Ikshvaku. The son of Ikshvaku, who was named Nimi, instituted a yajna that was to endure for 1,000 years, and applied to Vasishta to offer the oblations as the head priest. Vasishta in answer said that he had been pre-engaged by Indra for the next 500 years, but that if the Raja would wait for some time, he would come and officiate as superintending priest. The king made no answer, and Vasishta went away, supposing that he had assented. When the sage had completed the performance of the ceremonies he had conducted for Indra, he returned with all speed to Nimi, purposing to render him the like office. When he arrived, however, and found that Nimi had retained Gautama and other priests to minister at his yajna, he was much displeased, and pronounced upon the king, who was then asleep, a curse to this effect, that since he had not intimated his intention, but transferred to Gautama the duty he had first entrusted to himself, Vasishta, Nimi should thenceforth cease to exist in a corporeal form. When Nimi woke and knew what had happened, he in return denounced as an imprecation upon his unjust preceptor that he should also lose his bodily existence, as the punishment of uttering a curse upon him without previously communicating with him. Nimi then abandoned his bodily condition. The spirit of Vasishta, also leaving his body, was united with the spirits of Mitra and Varuna Devas for a season, until, through their passion for the Apsaras Urvashi, the sage was born again in a different shape. The corpse of Nimi was preserved from decay by being embalmed with fragrant oils and resins, and it remained as entire as if it were immortal. When the yajna was concluded, the priests applied to the gods who had come to receive their portions that they would confer a blessing upon the author of the yajna, the yajamana. The gods declared that they were willing to restore him to bodily life, but Nimi declined to accept their offer, saying, "O deities, who are the alleviators of all worldly suffering, there is not in the world a deeper cause of distress than the separation of soul and body. It is therefore my wish to dwell in the eyes of all beings, but never more to resume a corporeal shape." To this desire, the gods assented, and Nimi was placed by them in the eyes of all living creatures, in consequence of which their eyelids are ever opening and shutting. This is in part a play on words. Nimisha means to blink in Sanskrit. So he was merged into the function of blinking itself. As Nimi left no successor, the Munis, apprehensive of the consequences of the earth being without a ruler, agitated the body of the prince, for which purpose it had been embalmed and so preserved, and produced from it a prince who was called Janaka, from being born without a father. In consequence of his father being without a body, or Videha, he was also termed Vaideha, the son of the bodiless, and he further received the name of Miti from having been produced by matana, or agitation, of his father's corpse, using lost methods of alchemy. The son of Janaka was Udavasu. His son was Nandivardhana, and in tracing this line, it is relevant that after Janaka I, all of the kings of Mithila was their city, named after Miti, the founder of the city. All of the kings of Mithila were called Janaka, the Janaka dynasty, and Janaka became a hereditary title for them. But the second Janaka, the son of the first Janaka, was Udavasu. His son was Nandivardhana. His son was Suketu. His son was Devarata. His son was Brahadukta. His son was Mahavirya. His son was Satyadhriti. His son was Drishtaketu. His son was Haryashva. His son was Maru. His son was Pratibandhaka. His son was Kratarata. His son was Krata. His son was Vibudha. His son was Mahadriti. His son was Kratirata. His son was Maharoman. His son was Suvarnaroman. His son was Hrasvaroman. His son was Siradhvaja. Siradhvaja, plowing the ground to prepare it for a yajna which he instituted in order to obtain progeny. When he did this, there sprang up in the furrow in the earth a damsel who became his daughter Sita, the famous avatar Sita, wife of Rama. The brother of Siradhvaja was Kushadhvaja, who was king of Kashi. He had a son also named Bhanumat. The son of Bhanumat was Shatadyumna. His son was Shuchi. His son was Urjavaha. His son was Satyadhvaja. His son was Kuni. His son was Anjana. His son was Rutujit. His son was Arishtanemi. His son was Srotayus. His son was Suparshva. His son was Sanjaya. His son was Kshemari. His son was Anenas. His son was Minaratha. His son was Satyarata. Minaratha is an interesting name. There must have been a story behind it that isn't told here, because that means fish chariot, or one whose chariot is drawn by a fish. His son was Satyarata. His son Shatyarati. His son was Upagu. His son was Sruta. His son was Sasvata. His son was Sudhanvan. His son was Subhasa. His son was Susruta. His son was Jaya. His son was Vijaya. His son was Rita. His son was Sunaya. His son was Vetahavya. His son was Dhriti. His son was Bahulashva. His son was Kriti, with whom terminated the family of Janaka. He died without an heir. These are the kings of Mithila, who for the most part will be proficient in spiritual knowledge. Chapter 6. Indeed, most of them were very proficient in spiritual knowledge. Many of the Upanishads of the Vedas consist of dialogues between them and Maharshis, especially Jamadagnya, their family priest. I misspoke, not Jamadagnya, Yajnavalkya, their family priest. Chapter 6. Maitreya said, "You have given me, revered Guru, an account of the kings of the dynasty of the sun, the Suryavanshi line. I am now desirous to hear a description of those princes who trace their lineage from the moon, and whose race, the Somavanshi, is still celebrated for glorious deeds. Those are the two great lineages of Kshatriyas, the Suryavanshi and the Somavanshi, the solar dynasty and the lunar dynasty. You are able to relate it to me, Brahmana, if you will so favor me." Parashara said, "You shall hear from me, Maitreya, an account of the illustrious lineage of the moon, which has produced many celebrated rulers of the earth, a race adorned by the regal qualities of strength, valor, magnificence, prudence, and activity, and enumerating amongst its monarchs Nahusha, Yayati, Kartaviryarjuna, and others equally renowned. That race will I describe to you. Do you attend?" Atri was the son of Brahma, the creator of the universe, who sprang from the lotus that grew from the navel of Narayana. The son of Atri was Soma, the Soma Deva, the moon god, whom Brahma installed as the sovereign of plants, of Brahmanas, and of the stars. Soma celebrated the Rajasuya Yajna, and from the glory then acquired and the extensive dominion with which he had been invested, he became arrogant and licentious, and carried off Tara, the wife of Brahaspati, the guru of the Devas. In vain Brahaspati sought to recover his bride. In vain Brahma commanded, and the holy sages remonstrated. Soma refused to relinquish her. Ushanas, out of enmity to Brahaspati, the guru of the Asuras, took part with Soma. Rudra, who had studied under Angiras, the father of Brahaspati, befriended his fellow student. In consequence of Ushanas, their guru, joining Soma, Jamba, Kujambha, and all the Daityas, Danavas, and other foes of the Devas came also to his assistance, while Indra and all the Devas were the allies of Brahaspati. There then ensued a fierce contest, which, being on account of Tara, or Taraka, was termed the Tarakamaya War. In this, the Devas, led by Rudra, hurled their missiles on the enemy, and the Daityas with equal determination assailed the Devas. Earth, shaken to her center by the struggle between such foes, had recourse to Brahma for protection, on which he interposed in commanding Ushanas with the Asuras and Rudra with the deities to desist from strife, compelled Soma to restore Tara to her husband. Finding that she was pregnant, Brihaspati desired her no longer to retain her burden, and in obedience to his orders she was delivered of a son whom she deposited in a clump of long munja grass. The child, from the moment of its birth, was endued with a splendor that dimmed the radiance of every other divinity, and both Brihaspati and Soma, fascinated by his beauty, claimed him as their child. The gods, in order to settle the dispute, appealed to Tara, but she was ashamed and would make no answer. As she still continued mute to their repeated applications, the child became incensed and was about to curse her, saying, "Unless, vile woman, you immediately declare who is my father, I will sentence you to such a fate as shall deter every woman in future from hesitating to speak the truth." On this, Brahma again interfered and pacified the child, and then, addressing Tara, said, "Tell me, daughter, is this the child of Brihaspati or of Soma?" "Of Soma," said Tara, blushing. As soon as she had spoken, the Lord of the constellations, his countenance bright and expanding with rapture, embraced his son and said, "Well done, my boy, verily you are wise," and hence his name was Buddha. It has already been related how Buddha begot Pururavas by Ila. Pururavas was a prince renowned for liberality, devotion, magnificence, and love of truth, and for personal beauty. Urvashi, having incurred the imprecation of Mitra and Varuna, determined to take up her abode in the world of mortals, and descending accordingly, beheld Pururavas. This is a celestial apsaras, Urvashi. As soon as she saw him, she forgot all reserve, and disregarding the delights of Svarga, became deeply enamored of the prince. Beholding her infinitely superior to all other females in grace, elegance, symmetry, delicacy, and beauty, Pururavas was equally fascinated by Urvashi. Both were inspired by similar sentiments, and mutually feeling that each was everything to the other, thought no more of any other object. Confiding in his merits, Pururavas addressed the Apsaras and said, "Fair creature, I love you. Have compassion on me and return my affection." Urvashi, half averting her face through modesty, replied, "I will do so if you will observe the conditions I have to propose." "What are they?" inquired the prince. "Declare them." "I have 2 rams," said the Apsaras, "which I love as my children. They must be kept near my bedside and never suffered to be carried away. You must also take care never to be seen by me undressed, and clarified butter alone must be my food." To these terms, the king readily gave assent. After this, Pururavas and Urvashi dwelt together in Alaka, sporting amidst the groves and lotus-crowned lakes of Chaitrarata and the other forests there situated, for 61,000 years. Alaka is the capital city of the Yaksha race, the capital city of Raja Kubera. The love of Pururavas for his bride increased every day of its duration, and the affection of Urvashi augmenting equally in fervor, she never called to recollection her former residence amongst the immortals. Not so with the attendant spirits at the court of Indra, and nymphs, genii, and quipsters found heaven itself dull, but dull. These, of course, translating spirits like Apsaras, Gandharvas, perhaps Charanas, I might guess, for genii, while Urvashi was away. Knowing the agreement that Urvashi had made with the king, Vishvavasu was appointed by the Gandharvas to effect its violation, and he, coming by night to the chamber where they slept, carried off one of Urvashi's beloved rams. Urvashi was awakened by its cries and exclaimed, "Ah me, who has stolen one of my children? Had I a husband, this would not have happened. To whom shall I apply for aid?" The Raja overheard her lamentation, but recollecting that he was undressed and that Urvashi might see him in that state, did not move from the couch under which he lay in blankets, and so not seen by her. Then the Gandharvas came and stole the other ram, and Urvashi, hearing it bleat, cried out that a woman had no protector who was the bride of a prince so dastardly as to submit to this outrage. This incensed Pururavas highly, and trusting that the Apsaras would not see his person as it was dark, he rose and took his sword and pursued the robbers, calling upon them to stop and receive their punishment. At that moment, the Gandharvas caused a flash of brilliant lightning to play upon the chamber, and Urvashi beheld the king undressed. The compact was violated, because her rams had been carried off and she had seen him naked, and the Apsaras immediately disappeared. The Gandharvas, abandoning the rams, but since they didn't actually care to carry off her rams, they just wanted her to come home to them, departed to the region of the Devas. Having recovered the animals, the king returned delighted to his couch, but there he beheld no Urvashi, and not finding her anywhere, he wandered naked over the world like one insane. At length coming to Kurukshetra, he saw there Urvashi sporting with 4 other Apsaras of heaven in a lake beautified with lotuses, and he ran to her and called her his wife and wildly implored her to return. Mighty monarch, said the Apsaras, refrain from this extravagance. I am now pregnant. Depart at present and come hither at the end of a year, when I will deliver to you a son and remain with you for 1 night. Pururavas, thus comforted, returned to his capital. Urvashi said to her companions, This prince is a most excellent mortal. I lived with him long and affectionately united. It was well done of you, they replied. He is indeed of comely appearance, and one with whom we could live happily forever. When the year had expired, Urvashi and the monarch met at Kurukshetra, and she consigned to him his firstborn, Ayus. And these annual interviews were repeated until she had borne to him 5 sons. So each time they would meet for 1 night and conceive another son, and then meet up again 1 year later. She then said to Pururavas, Through regard for me, all the Gandharvas have expressed their joint purpose to bestow upon my lord their benediction. Let him therefore demand a boon. The Raja replied, My enemies are all destroyed already. My faculties are all entire. I have friends and kindred, armies and treasuries. There is nothing which I may not obtain, except living in the same region with my Urvashi. My only desire, therefore, is to pass my life with her. When he had thus spoken, the Gandharvas brought to Pururavas a vessel of fire, and said to him, Take this fire, and according to the precepts of the Vedas, divide it into 3 fires. Then, fixing your mind upon the idea of living with Urvashi, offer oblations, and you shall assuredly obtain your wishes. The Raja took the brazier and departed and came to a forest. Then he began to reflect that he had committed a great folly in bringing away the vessel of fire instead of his bride, and leaving the vessel in the wood, he went disconsolate to his palace. In the middle of the night he awoke, and considered that the Gandharvas had given him the brazier to enable him to obtain the felicity of living with Urvashi, and that it was absurd in him to have left it by the way. Resolving therefore to recover it, he arose and went to the place where he had deposited the vessel, but it was gone. In its stead, he saw a young Ashwatha tree. This is the holy fig tree in modern Indian languages, more often called a peepal tree, growing out of a shami plant, another type of tree. And he reasoned with himself and said, I left in this spot a vessel of fire, and now behold a young Ashwatha tree growing out of a shami tree. Verily, I will take these types of fire to my capital, and there, having engendered fire by their attrition, I will worship it. To use an Ashwatha stick and a shami stick to kindle a fire. Having thus determined, he took these plants to his city and prepared their wood for attrition, with pieces of as many inches long as there are syllables in the Gayatri. He recited that holy verse and rubbed together sticks of as many inches as he recited syllables in the Gayatri. The line repeats. Having thence elicited fire, he made it 3-fold, according to the injunctions of the Vedas, and offered oblations with it, proposing. So the Vedic 3-fold fire. This is the Garhapatya Agni, the household fire, the Dakshina Agni, the southern fire, and then the Sarota Agni, or the primary Yajna fire. Proposing at the end of the ceremony reunion with Urvashi. In this way, celebrating many yajnas agreeably to the form in which offerings are presented with fire, Pururavas obtained a seat in Gandharva Loka and was no more separated from his beloved. Thus fire, that was at first but one, was made 3-fold in the present Manvantara by the son of Ila. Chapter 7. Pururavas had 6 sons: Ayus, Dhimat, Amavasu, Vishvavasu, Shatayus, and Srotayus. So he had already had 5 sons by Urvashi during that story. So apparently they had one more after that. The son of Amavasu was Bhima. His son was Kanchana. His son was Suhotra, whose son was Jahnu. This prince, Jahnu, while performing a yajna, saw the whole of the place overflowed by the waters of the Ganga. Highly offended at this intrusion, his eyes red with anger, he united the spirit of yajna with himself by the power of his devotion and drank up the river. The gods and sages upon this came and appeased his indignation and reobtained Ganga from him, in the capacity of his daughter, whence she obtained the name of Jahnavi, daughter of Jahnu. The son of Jahnu was Sumantu. His son was Ajaka. His son was Balakashva. His son was Kusha, who had 4 sons: Kushamba, Kushanabha, Amurtaya, and Amavasu. Kushamba, being desirous of a son, engaged in devout tapas to obtain one who should be equal to Indra. Observing the intensity of his devotions, Indra was alarmed lest a prince of power like his own should be engendered, and determined therefore to take upon himself the character of Kushamba's son, so that to get around the boon producing a rival, which is a son equal to Indra, by having the son in fact be Indra. So Indra himself was accordingly born as Gadhi, of the race of Kusha, of the Kaushika line. Gadhi, an avatar of Indra, had a daughter named Satyavati. Rachika, of the descendants of Bhrigu, demanded her in marriage. The king was very unwilling to give his daughter to a peevish old Brahmana, and demanded of him as the nuptial present 1,000 fleet horses, whose color should be white, with 1 black ear. Very significantly here, clearly at this ancient time, the custom was for dowry to be paid by the family of the groom to the family of the bride, and not vice versa as it is now. Rachika, having propitiated Varuna, the god of the ocean, obtained from him, at the only place called Ashvatirtha, 1,000 such steeds, and giving them to the king, espoused his daughter. In order to effect the birth of a son, Rachika prepared a dish of rice, barley, and pulse, with butter and milk for his wife to eat, and at her request he consecrated a similar mixture for her mother, by partaking of which she should give birth to a prince of martial prowess. Leaving both dishes for his wife, after describing particularly which was intended for her and which for her mother, the sage went forth to the forests. When the time arrived for the food to be eaten, the queen said to Satyavati, "Daughter, all persons wish their children to be possessed of excellent qualities, and would be mortified to see them surpassed by the merits of their mother's brother. It would be desirable for you, therefore, to give me the mess your husband has set apart for you, and for you to eat of that intended for me. For the son which it is to procure me is destined to be the monarch of the whole world, while that which your dish would give you must be a Brahmana, alike devoid of affluence, valor, and power." Satyavati agreed to her mother's proposal, and they exchanged meals. When Rachika returned home and beheld Satyavati, he said to her, "Sinful woman, what have you done? I view your body of a fearful appearance. Of a surety you have eaten the consecrated food which was prepared for your mother. You have done wrong. In that food I had infused the properties of power and strength and heroism. In yours, the qualities suited to a Brahmana, gentleness, knowledge, and resignation. In consequence of having reversed my plans, your son shall follow a warrior's propensities, and use weapons, and fight, and slay. Your mother's son shall be born with the inclinations of a Brahmana, and shall be addicted to peace and to piety." Satyavati, hearing this, fell at her husband's feet and said, "My lord, I have done this thing through ignorance. Have compassion on me. Let me not have a son such as you have foretold. If such there must be, let it be my grandson, not my son." The Muni, relenting at her distress, replied, "So let it be." Such that these qualities latent in her son would pass to her grandson and only then become manifest. Accordingly, in due season, she gave birth to Jamadagni, and her mother brought forth Vishvamitra. Satyavati afterwards became the Kaushiki River. Jamadagni married Renuka, the daughter of Renu, of the family of Ikshvaku, and had by her the destroyer of the Kshatriya race, Parashurama, who was a portion of Narayana, the spiritual guide of the universe. Chapter 8. Ayus, the eldest son of Pururavas, married the daughter of Rahu, by whom he had 5 sons, Nahusha, Kshatravradha, Rambha, Raji, and Anenas. The son of Kshatravradha was Suhotra, who had 3 sons, Kasha, Lesha, and Ghrittasamada. The son of that last, the son of Ghrittasamada, was Shaunaka, who first established the distinctions of the 4 Varnas. The son of Kasha was Kashiraja, his son was Dhirkatamas, his son was Dhanvantari, whose nature was exempt from human infirmities and who in every existence had been master of universal knowledge. In his past life, when he was produced by the agitation of the Milky Sea, Narayana had conferred upon him the boon that he should subsequently be born again in the family of Kashiraja, should compose the 8-fold system of Ayurveda, and should be thereafter entitled to a share of offerings made to the gods. The son of that great Dhanvantari was Ketumat. His son was Bhimarata. His son was Divodasa. His son was Pratardana, so named from destroying the race of Bhadrasrainya. He had various other appellations, such as Shatrujit, the victor over his foes, from having vanquished all his enemies, Vatsa, or child, from his fathers frequently calling him by that name, Ratadhvaja, he whose emblem was truth, being a great observer of veracity, and Kuvalayashva, because he had a horse called Kuvalaya. The son of this prince was Alarka, of whom this verse is still sung in the present day. For 60,060 years, no other youthful monarch except Alarka reigned over the earth. In other words, saying that that Alarka was such the perfect picture of a youthful monarch that in all the ages since then there has been none other so worthy of the title of a perfect young prince. The son of this Alarka was Santati. His son was Sunita. His son was Suketu. His son was Dharmaketu. His son was Satyaketu. His son was Vibhu. His son was Suvibhu. His son was Sukumara. His son was Drashtaketu. His son was Vainahotra. His son was Bharga. His son was Bhargabhumi, from whom also rules for the 4 Varnas were promulgated. These are the Kashya princes, or the descendants of Kasha, and the rulers of the city of Kashi. We will now enumerate the descendants of Raji. Raji had 500 sons. This is the beginning of chapter 9, all of unequaled daring and vigor. Upon the occurrence of a war between the Asuras and the Devas, both parties inquired of Brahma which would be victorious. The deity replied, "That for which Raji shall take up arms." Accordingly, the Daityas immediately repaired to Raji to secure his alliance, which he promised them if he would make him their Indra after defeating the Devas. To this they answered and said, "We cannot profess one thing and mean another. Our Indra is Prahlada, and it is for him that we wage war." Having thus spoken, they departed, and the gods, the Devas, then came to him on the like errand. He proposed to them the same conditions, and they agreed that he should be their Indra. Raji therefore joined the heavenly host of the Devas, and by his numerous and formidable weapons destroyed the army of their enemies. When the Asuras were discomfited, Indra placed the feet of Raji upon his head and said, "You have preserved me from a great danger, and I acknowledge you as my father. You are the sovereign chief over all the regions, and I, the Indra of the 3 spheres, am your son." The Raja smiled and said, "Even be it so. The regard that is conciliated by many agreeable speeches is not to be resisted even when such language proceeds from a foe, much less should the kind words of a friend fail to win our affection." He accordingly returned to his own city, and Indra remained as his deputy in the government of heaven. When Raji ascended to the skies, his sons, at the instigation of Narada, demanded the rank of Indra as their hereditary right. And the deity refused to acknowledge as the deity Indra refused to acknowledge their supremacy, they reduced him to submission by force and usurped his station. After some considerable time had elapsed, the god of 100 yajnas, Indra, deprived of his share of offerings to the immortals, which had been seized by the sons of Raji, Indra met Brahaspati in a retired place and said to him, "Cannot you give me a little of the sacrificial butter, even if it were no bigger than a jujube, for I am in want of sustenance?" "If," replied Brahaspati, "I had been applied to you before, I could have done anything for you that you wished. As it is, I will endeavor and restore you in a few days to your sovereignty." So saying, he commenced a yajna for the purpose of increasing the might of Indra and of leading the sons of Raji into error, and so affecting their downfall. Misled by their mental fascination, the princes became enemies of the Brahmanas, regardless of their duties and condemners of the precepts of the Vedas, and thus devoid of morality and dharma. They were slain by Indra, who by the assistance of the priest of the Devas resumed his place in heaven. Whoever hears this story shall retain forever his proper place, and never be guilty of wicked acts. Rambha, the third son of Ayus, had no progeny. Kshatravradha had a son named Pratikshatra. His son was Sanjaya, his son was Vijaya, his son was Yajñakrit, his son was Harshavardhana, his son was Sahadeva, his son was Adina, his son was Jayasena, his son was Sankrati, his son was Kshatradharman. These were the descendants of Kshatravradha. I will now mention those of Nahusha. Chapter 10. Yati, Yayati, Sanyati, Ayati, Vyati, and Kriti were the 6 valiant sons of Nahusha. Yati declined the sovereignty, despite being the eldest, and Yayati, the second eldest, therefore succeeded to the throne. He had 2 wives, Devayani, the daughter of Ushanas, Ushanas, the guru of the Asuras, and Sharmishtha, the daughter of Rishaparvan, of whom this genealogical verse is recited. Devayani bore 2 sons, Yadu and Turvasu. Sharmishta, the daughter of Rishaparvan, had 3 sons, Druhyu, Anu, and Puru. Through the curse of Ushanas, Yayati became old and infirm before his time. But having appeased his father-in-law, he obtained permission to transfer his decrepitude to anyone who would consent to take it. He first applied to his eldest son Yadu and said, "Your maternal grandfather has brought this premature decay upon me. By his permission, however, I may transfer it to you for 1,000 years. I am not yet satiate with worldly enjoyments and wish to partake of them through the means of your youth. Do not refuse compliance with my request." Yadu, however, was not willing to take upon him his father's decay, on which his father denounced an imprecation upon him and said, "Your posterity shall not possess dominion." He then applied successively to Druhyu, Turvasu, and Anu and demanded of them their juvenile vigor. They all refused and were in consequence cursed by the king. Lastly, he made this request of Sharmishta's youngest son, Puru, who bowed to his father and readily consented to give him his youth and receive in exchange Yayati's infirmities, saying that his father had conferred upon him a great favor in the opportunity to be of such service to his father. The king Yayati, being thus endowed with renovated youth, conducted the affairs of state for the good of his people, enjoying such pleasures as were suited to his age and strength and were not incompatible with virtue. He formed a connection with the celestial Apsaras Vishvachi, and was wholly attached to her and conceived no end to his desires. The more they were gratified, the more ardent they became, as it is said in this verse. Desire is not appeased by enjoyment. Fire fed with oil becomes but the more intense. No one has ever more than enough of rice or barley or gold or cattle or women. Abandon, therefore, inordinate desire. When a mind finds neither good nor ill in all objects, but looks upon all with an equal eye, then everything yields it pleasure. The wise man is filled with happiness who escapes from desire, which the feeble-minded can with difficulty relinquish, and which grows not old with the aged. The hair becomes gray, the teeth fall out as man advances in years, but the love of wealth, the love of life, are not impaired by age. 1,000 years have passed, reflected Yayati, and my mind is still devoted to pleasure. Every day my desires are awakened by new objects. I will therefore now renounce all sensual enjoyment, and fix my mind upon spiritual truth. Unaffected by the alternatives of pleasure and pain, and having nothing I may call my own, I will henceforth roam the forests with the deer. Having made this determination, Yayati restored his youth to Puru, resumed his own decrepitude, installed his youngest son Puru in the sovereignty, since he had disinherited all his other sons, and departed to the Tapovana, to the forest of tapas. To Turvasu he consigned the southeast districts of his kingdom, the west to Druhyu, the south to Yadu, and the north to Anu, to govern as viceroys under their younger brother Puru, whom he appointed supreme monarch of the earth. Chapter 11. I will first relate to you the family of Yadu, the eldest son of Yayati, in which the eternal, immutable Vishnu descended upon earth in a portion of his essence, of which the glory cannot be described, though forever hymned in order to confer the fruit of all their wishes, whether they desired virtue, wealth, pleasure, or liberation. This, of course, meaning dharma, artha, kama, or moksha, upon all created beings, upon humans, saints, gandharvas, spirits of evil, apsaras, centaurs, nagas, birds, asuras, devas, sages, brahmanas, and ascetics. Whoever hears the account of the race of Yadu shall be released from all sin, for the supreme spirit that is without form and which is called Vishnu was manifested in this family. This, of course, referring to Sri Krishna, who took birth in the line of Yadu. Yadu had 4 sons, Sahasrajit, Kroshti, Nala, and Raghu. Shatajit was the son of the elder of these, and he had 3 sons, Haihaya, Venu, and Haya. The son of Haihaya was Dharmanetra. His son was Kunti. His son was Sahanji. His son was Mahishmat. His son was Bhadrasena. His son was Durdama. His son was Dhanaka, who had 4 sons, Kratavirya, Kratagni, Kratavarman, and Krataujas. Kratavirya's son was Arjuna, the sovereign of the seven Dvipas, the lord of 1,000 arms. This prince propitiated the sage Dattatreya, the descendant of Atri, who was a portion of Vishnu, and solicited and obtained from him these boons: 1,000 weapons, to never act unjustly, subjugation of the world by justice and protecting it equitably, victory over his enemies, and death by the hands of a person renowned in the 3 regions of the universe. With these means he ruled over the whole earth with might and justice and offered 10,000 yajnas. Of him this verse is still recited. The kings of the earth will assuredly never pursue his steps in yajna, in munificence, in devotion, in courtesy, and in self-control. In his reign nothing was lost or injured, and so he governed the whole earth with undiminished health, prosperity, power, and might for 85,000 years. While sporting in the waters of the Narmada River and elevated with wine, Ravana came on his tour of triumph to the city Mahishmati, and there he boasted of overthrowing the Devas, the Daityas, the Gandharvas, and their king was taken prisoner by Kartavirya and confined like a tame beast in a corner of his capital. At the expiration of his long reign, Kartavirya was killed by Parashurama, who was an embodied portion of the mighty Narayana. Of the 100 sons of this king, that of course occurred during one of Parashurama's killing of all the Kshatriya kings. Of the 100 sons of this king, the 5 principal were Shura, Shurasena, Vrashana, Madhu, and Jayadvaja. The son of the last was Talajanga, who had 100 sons called after him, the Talajangas. The eldest of these was Vitihotra. Another was Bharata, who had 2 sons, Vrasha and Sujati. And so it appears that the line of the Talajangas continued not through the eldest of them, but through one of the other ones, Bharata. The son of Vrasha was Madhu. He had 100 sons, the chief of whom was Vrishni, and from him the family obtained the name of Vrishni, the tribe of the Vrishnis. From the name of their father Madhu, they were also called the Madhavas. while from the denomination of their common ancestor Yadu, the whole of them were termed Yadavas. And from this, you will recall all the time in the story of Krishna in the Bhagavata Purana that he and his people were often referred to as the Yadavas or as the Vrishnis. Chapter 12. Shri, the son of Yadu, had a son named Vrijinivat. His son was Swahi. His son was Roshardru. His son was Chitrarata. His son was Shashavindu, who was lord of the 14 great gems. Now, the 14 great gems, there's a few different lists as to what the 14 great gems are. Some consider them to be 14 literal gemstones of great worth. Some say that these are metaphorical gems, articles of the best of their kind, 7 animate and 7 inanimate, and that these refer to his wife being the gem among wives, his priest being the gem among priests, his general of his army, him having the best charioteer, the best horse, the best elephant, and the best army of foot soldiers. Another list given by different commentators gives the wife, the priest, the general, the charioteer, the best executioner, the best economist, and the best reader of the Vedas. And there was another whole list of this, the other 7, the inanimate 7, are the best chariot, the best umbrella. One is a literal gem, the best jewel, the best sword, the best shield, the best banner, and the best treasure. These are the 14 great gems of Shashavindu, according to some. He had 100,000 wives and 1,000,000 of sons. The most renowned of them were Protuyashas, Protokarman, Protojaya, Protokirti, Protodana, and Protosravas. The son of the last of these 6, the son of Prodhusravas, was Tamas. His son was Ushanas, who celebrated 100 Ashvamedha Yajnas. His son was Shiteyus. His son was Rukmakavacha. His son was Paravrat, who had 5 sons: Rukmeshu, Protorukman, Jyagma, Palita, and Harita. To this day, the following verse related to Jyagmaga is repeated, the middle of the 5 sons of Paravrat. Of all the husbands submissive to their wives, who have been or who will be, the most eminent is the king Jyamaga, who was the husband of Shavya. Shavya was barren, but Jyamaga was so much afraid of her that he did not take any other wife. This story you might recognize from, it's told in the Bhagavatam as well. On one occasion, the king, after a desperate conflict with elephants and horses, defeated a powerful foe who, abandoning wife, children, kin, army, treasure, and dominion, fled. When the enemy was put to flight, Jyamaga beheld a lovely princess left alone by them, and exclaiming, "Save me, father, save me, brother," as her large eyes rolled wildly with affright. The king was struck by her beauty and penetrated with affection for her, and said to himself, "This is fortunate. I have no children and am the husband of a sterile bride. This maiden has fallen into my hands to rear up to me posterity. I will espouse her, but first I will take her in my car and convey her to my palace, or I must request the concurrence of the queen in these nuptials." Accordingly, he took the princess into his chariot, and returned to his own capital. When Jyamaga's approach was announced, Shavya, his queen, came to the palace, or his princess rather, came to the palace gate, attended by the ministers, the courtiers, and the citizens, to welcome the victorious monarch. But when she beheld the maiden standing on the left hand of the king, her lips swelled and slightly quivered with resentment, and she said to Jyamaga, "Who is this light-hearted damsel that is with you in the chariot?" The king, unprepared with a reply, made answer precipitately, through fear of his queen, "This is my daughter-in-law." "I have never had a son," rejoined Shavya, "and you have no other children. Of what son of yours, then, is this girl the wife?" The king, disconcerted by the jealousy and anger which the words of Shavya displayed, made this reply to her in order to prevent further contention: "She is the young bride of the future son whom you shall bring forth." Hearing this, Shaivya smiled gently and said, "So be it," and the king entered into his great palace. In consequence of this conversation regarding the birth of a son having taken place in an auspicious conjunction, aspect, and season, the queen, although past the time of women, meaning, in other words, too old for it to be likely for her to become pregnant, became shortly afterwards pregnant and bore a son. His father named him Vijarbha and married him to the damsel that he had brought home. They had 3 sons, Krata, Kaishika, and Romapada. The son of Romapada was Babru, and his son was Dhriti. The son of Kaishika was Chedi, whose descendants were called the Chaidya kings. The son of Krata was Kunti, his son was Vrishni, his son was Nirvrati, his son was Dasharha, his son was Vyoman, his son was Jimuta, his son was Vikriti, his son was Bhimarata, his son was Navrata, his son was Dasharata, his son was Shakuni, his son was Karambhi, his son was Devarata, his son was Devakshatara, his son was Madhu, his son was Anavarata, his son was Kuruvatsa, his son was Anurata, his son was Puruhotra, his son was Anshu, his son was Satvata, from whom the princes of this house were termed the Sattvatas. This was the progeny of Jyamaga, by listening to the account of which a man is purified from his sins. Chapter 13. The sons of Satvata were Bhajina, Bhajamana, Divya, Andhaka, Devavradha, Mahabhoja, and Vrishni. Bhajamana had 3 sons, Nimi, Krikarna, and Vrishni, by one wife, and 3 more by another, Satrajit, Shastrajit, and Ayutajit. The son of Devavradha was Babru, of whom this verse is recited. We hear when afar, and we behold when nigh, that Babru is the first of men, and Devavradha is equal to the Devas. 66 persons following the precepts of 1 in 6,008 who were disciples of the other obtained immortality. Mahabhoja was a pious prince. His descendants were the Bhojas, the princes of Mrittikavati, then called Martikavatas. Vrishni had 2 sons, Sumitra and Yudhajit. From the former, Anamitra and Shini were born. The son of Anamitra was Nigna, who had 2 sons, Prasena and Satrajit. The divine Aditya, the sun god himself, was the friend of Satrajit. On one occasion, Satrajit, while walking along the seashore, addressed his mind to Surya and hymned his praises, on which the divinity appeared and stood before him. Beholding him in an indistinct shape, Satrajit said to the sun, I have beheld you, Lord, and the heavens as a globe of fire. Do you now show favor unto me that I may see you in your proper form? On this the sun, taking the jewel called Syamantaka from off his neck, placed it apart, and Satrajit beheld him of a dwarfish stature, with a body like burnished copper and slightly reddish eyes. Having offered his adorations, Surya desired him to demand a boon, and he requested that the jewel might become his. Surya presented it to him and then resumed his place in the sky. Having obtained the spotless gem of gems, Satrajit wore it on his neck, and becoming as brilliant thereby as the sun himself, irradiating all the region with his splendor, he returned to Dwaraka, where he lived, the city of Shri Krishna, who by this time has taken birth. The inhabitants of that city, beholding him approach, repaired to the eternal Purushottama, who, to sustain the burden of the earth, had assumed a mortal form as Krishna, and said to him, Lord, assuredly the sun god is coming to visit you. But Krishna smiled and said, It is not the sun god, but Satrajit, to whom Aditya has presented the Syamantaka gem, and he now wears it. Go and behold him without apprehension. Accordingly they departed. Satrajit, having gone to his house, there deposited the jewel, which yielded daily 8 loads of gold, and through its marvelous virtue dispelled all fear of evil omens, wild beasts, fire, robbers, and famine. Achyuta was of the opinion that this wonderful gem should be in the possession of Ugrasena, the Raja of Dwaraka. But although he had the power of taking it from Satyajit, Achyuta, of course, being a name of Krishna here, but although Krishna had the power of taking the gem from Satyajit, he did not do so, that he might not occasion any disagreement amongst the family. Satyajit, on the other hand, fearing that Krishna would ask him for the jewel, transferred it to his brother Prasena for safekeeping. Now, it was the peculiar property of this jewel that although it was an inexhaustible source of good to a virtuous person, yet when borne by a man of bad character, it would be the cause of his death. Prasena, having taken the gem and hung it round his neck, mounted his horse and went to the woods to hunt. He being a man of bad character, in the chase he was killed by a lion. The lion, taking the jewel in his mouth, was about to depart, when he was observed and killed by Jambavant, the king of the bears, who, carrying off the gem, retired into his cave and gave it to his son Sukumara to play with. When some time had elapsed and Prasena did not appear, the Yadavas began to whisper to another, and to say, "This is Krishna's doing. Desirous of the jewel, he has perpetrated the murder of Prasena in order to get it into his possession." When these calumnious rumors came to the knowledge of Krishna, he collected a number of the Yadavas, and accompanied by them, pursued the course of Prasena by tracking his horse's hoofprints. Ascertaining by this means that he and his horse had been killed by a lion, he was acquitted by all the people of any share in his death. Desirous of recovering the gem, Krishna then followed the steps of the lion, and at no great distance came to the place where the lion had been killed by the bear. Following the footmarks of the latter, he arrived at the foot of a mountain, where he desired the Yadavas to await him while he continued the track alone. Still guided by the marks of the feet of the bear, he discovered a cavern, and had scarcely entered it when he heard the nurse of Sukumara, the bear prince, saying to him, "The lion killed Prasena, the lion has been killed by Jambavant. Weep not, Sukumara, the Syamantaka is your own." Thus assured of his object, Krishna advanced into the cavern, and saw the brilliant jewel in the hands of the nurse, who was giving it as a plaything to the bear prince Sukumara. The nurse soon descried his approach, and marking his eyes fixed upon the gem with eager desire, called loudly for help. Hearing her cries, Jambavant, full of anger, came to the cave, and a conflict ensued between him and Achyuta, which lasted 21 days. The Yadavas, who had accompanied the latter, waited 7 or 8 days in expectation of his return, but as the foe of Madhu still did not come forth, they concluded that he must have met his death in the cavern. It could not have required so many days, they thought, to overcome an enemy, and accordingly they departed and returned to Dwaraka and announced that Krishna had been killed. When the relations of Achyuta heard this intelligence, they performed all the obsequial rites suited to the occasion. The food and water thus offered to Krishna and the celebration of his Sraddha served to support his life and invigorate his strength in the combat in which he was engaged, while his adversary, wearied by daily conflict with a powerful foe, bruised and battered on every limb by heavy blows and enfeebled by want of food, became unable longer to resist him. Overcome by his mighty antagonist, Jambavant cast himself before him and said, "You mighty being are surely invincible, that you could not be conquered by all the demons and by all the spirits of heaven, earth, or hell. Much less are you to be vanquished by means and powers of creatures in a human shape, or by such as we are, who are born of brute origin. Undoubtedly, you are a portion of my sovereign Lord Narayana, the defender of the universe." Thus addressed by Jambavant, Krishna explained to him fully that he had descended to take upon himself the burden of the earth, and kindly alleviated the bodily pain which the bear suffered from the fight, simply by touching him with his hand. Jambavant again prostrated himself before Krishna, and presented to him his own daughter, Jambavanti, as an offering suitable to a guest. He also, to such a guest as Krishna, he also delivered to his visitor the Syamantaka jewel. Although a gift from such an individual was not fit for his acceptance, yet Krishna took the gem for the purpose of clearing his reputation. He then returned along with his bride Jambavanti to Dwaraka. When the people of Dwaraka beheld Krishna alive and returned, they were filled with delight, so that those that were bowed down with years recovered their youthful vigor, and all the Yadavas, men and women, assembled round Anakadundhubi, the father of the hero, and congratulated him. That's Krishna's father, Anakadundhubi Vasudeva. Krishna related to the whole assembly of the Yadavas all that had happened exactly as it had befallen, and restoring the Syamantaka jewel to Satyajit, was exonerated from the crime of which he had been falsely accused. He then led Jambavanti into the inner apartments. When Satyajit reflected that he had been the cause of the aspersions upon Krishna's character, he felt alarmed, and to conciliate the prince, since he now assumed that Krishna would regard him as an enemy, he gave him to wife his own daughter, Satyabhama. The maiden, Satyabhama, had been previously sought in marriage by several of the most distinguished Yadavas, and Akrura, Kritavarman, and Shatadhanvan, who had all wanted to marry Satyabhama, were highly incensed at her being wedded to another and leagued in enmity, against Satyajit, as they perceived it. The chief amongst them, with Akrura and Kritavarman, said to Shatadhanvan, "This caitiff Satyajit has offered a gross insult to you as well as to us who solicited his daughter by giving her to Krishna. Let him not live. Why do you not kill him and take the jewel? Should Achyuta therefore enter into feud with you, we will take your part." Upon this promise, Shatadhanvan undertook to slay Satyajit. When news arrived that the sons of Pandu had been burned in the house of wax, Krishna, who knew the real truth, set off for Varanavata to allay the animosity of Duryodhana and to perform the duties his relationship with that family required. Shatadhanvan, taking advantage of Krishna's absence from Dwaraka, killed Satyajit in his sleep and took possession of the Syamantaka gem. Upon this coming to the knowledge of Satyabhama, the daughter of the murdered man, she immediately mounted her chariot and, filled with fury at her father's murder, repaired to Varanavata and told her husband Krishna how Satyajit had been killed by Shatadhanvan in resentment of her having been married to another, and how he had carried off the jewel, and she implored him to take prompt measures to avenge such heinous wrong. Krishna, who is ever internally placid, being informed of these transactions, said to Satyabhama as his eyes flashed with indignation, "These are indeed audacious injuries, but I will not submit to them from so vile a wretch. They must assail the tree who would kill the birds that there have built their nests. Dismiss excessive sorrow. It needs not your lamentations to excite any wrath." Returning forthwith to Dwaraka, Krishna took Baladeva, his brother, apart, and said to him, "A lion slew Prasena hunting in the forests, and now Satyajit has been murdered by Shatadhanvan. As both thieves are removed, the jewel which belonged to them is our common right. Up then, ascend your chariot and put Shatadhanvan to death." Being thus excited by his brother, Balarama engaged resolutely in the enterprise, but Shatadhanvan, being aware of their hostile designs, repaired to Kritavarman and requested his assistance. Kritavarman, however, declined to assist him, pleading his inability to engage in a conflict with both Baladeva and Krishna. Shatadhanvan, thus disappointed, applied to Akrura, but he said, "You must have recourse to some other protector. How should I be able to defend you? There is no one, even amongst the immortals, whose praises are celebrated throughout the universe, who is capable of contending with the wielder of the discus, at the stamp of whose foot the three worlds tremble, whose hand makes the wives of the Asuras widows, whose weapons no host, however mighty, can resist. No one is capable of encountering the wielder of the plowshare, who annihilates the prowess of his enemies by the mere glances of his eyes that roll with the joys of wine, and whose vast plowshare manifests his might by seizing and exterminating the most formidable foes." "Since this is the case," replied Shatadhanvan, "and you are unable to assist me, at least accept and take care of this jewel." "I will do so," replied Akrura, "if you promise that even in the last extremity you will not divulge its being in my possession." To this Shatadhanvan agreed, and Akrura took the jewel. And Shatadhanvan, mounting a very swift mare, one that could travel 100 leagues a day, fled from Dwaraka. When Krishna heard of Shatadhanvan's flight, he harnessed his 4 horses, Shaivya, Sugriva, Meghapushpa, and Balahaka, to his chariot, and accompanied by Balarama, they set off in pursuit. The mare held her speed and accomplished her 100 leagues, but when she reached the country of Mithila, her strength was exhausted and she dropped down and died. Shatadhanvan, dismounting, continued his flight on foot. When his pursuers came to the place where the mare had perished, Krishna said to Balarama, "Do you remain in the car, while I follow the villain on foot and put him to death. The ground here is bad, and the horses will not be able to drag the chariot across it." Balarama accordingly stayed with the chariot, and Krishna followed Shatadhanvan on foot. When he had chased him for 2 kosha, he discharged his chakram, and although Shatadhanvan was still at a considerable distance, the weapon struck off his head. Krishna then coming up, searched his body and his clothing for the Syamantaka jewel, but found it not. He then returned to Balabhadra and told him that they had effected the death of Shatadhanvan to no purpose, for the precious gem, the quintessence of all worlds, was not upon his person. When Balabhadra heard this, he flew into a violent rage and said to Vasudeva, "Shame light upon you to be thus greedy of wealth. I acknowledge no brotherhood with you. Here lies my path. Go whither you please. I have done with Dwaraka, with you, with all our house. It is of no use to seek to impose upon me with your perjuries." Thus reviling his brother, who fruitlessly endeavored to appease him, Balabhadra, who was famously hot-tempered, went to the city of Videha, where Janaka received him hospitably, and there he remained. Of course, recall that all the kings of Videha are called Janaka. Vasudeva returned to Dwaraka. It was during his stay in the dwelling of Janaka that Duryodhana, the son of Dhritarashtra, learned from Balabhadra the art of fighting with the mace. At the expiration of 3 years, Ugrasena and other chiefs of the Yadavas, being satisfied that Krishna had not the jewel, went to Videha and removed Balabhadra's suspicions and brought him home, reconciled, that Krishna had not been seeking the jewel out of personal greed. I think that may be a good stopping point. We're in the middle of a chapter, but it is a very lengthy chapter. It continues for some time more. That is somewhat a pause in the story. So we can resume the history of the Syamantaka gem next time.
Thank you so much, Devala.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming.
And welcome. I haven't had a chance to attend because there is a little conflict with my schedule, but I do catch up on the videos.
All right. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you. Nice to see you again. It's been a while.
I hope you had a nice time in India.
Yeah.
And I'm putting my new number in the chat. Yeah. Okay. If you could add it, because I had requested that to Radhaji. Probably she forgot.
Yeah, I can add it to the WhatsApp group.
Yes. Yeah. So that was another reason, because we get prompts and it's like you're starting soon, and
you were getting it. You weren't getting it, but the new number got it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
All good. And how are you, Andy, and everybody? I'm waiting to hear what Andy has to ask.
It looks like Andy had to take off. I know that he's in Ukraine right now.
Oh.
So yeah, he's in somewhat intense living conditions. He is doing yajnas every day. He is pretty close to the front lines of the war. So I know he's gets air raids and stuff sometimes, living in rather dangerous conditions. So
oh, well, please pass on, the peace and love and kindness and ease to him.
Yes.
Whenever you talk to him. I don't know whether he has an access, but I will send it in the WhatsApp too, just
yeah, he has been following the WhatsApp group. He has a Ukrainian SIM card, so he's added with that number.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. So I wasn't getting much because my phone number is changed. So if you could just add it on the group,